We're back, and new tapes from President Kennedy's assassination have been released, adding to the story of this elusive hero. Presidential historian and Rice University professor Douglas Brinkley joins us right now. Douglas, thank you for joining us right now. Here's a telephone conversation you and I talked about earlier today between Rose Kennedy, of course, the mother of John F. Kennedy, and newly sworn-in President Lyndon Johnson and Lady Bird, his wife, aboard Air Force One just hours after the shooting in Dallas. Let's listen to this brand-new tape.
Ms. Kennedy?
Yes, Mr. President. Yes.
I wish to God there was something that I could do, and I wanted to tell you that we were grieving with you.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I know you love Jack, and he loves you.
Ms. Kennedy, we feel like we just had a...
Yes. All right.
We're glad that the nation had the son as long as it did.
Yes, well, thank you, Lady Bird. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Yes. Love and prayers to all of you.
Thank you very much.
You know, I don't know what to say about that, Doug. It just strikes me as kind of a terse conversation. Maybe it's all shock, but not much heart there. It's just strange conversation.
It's very strange, and obviously there's no love lost between John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, but I think Rose Kennedy was obviously in shock and had to take the phone call, but didn't want to stay on the line very long and got off. It probably doesn't help the scenario any that their husband or John F. Kennedy's dead, and he was killed in Texas, Lyndon Johnson's state.
Oh, yeah. Would you really think that it's hard for me doing all the work on it? You've done it, too, about that relationship between Jack Kennedy. I know he picked Johnson for his own needs to win Texas and win some other southern states. They were never buddies before, probably never buddies again. But what is your thinking about the real sentiments involved between those two guys, the two presidents?
Oh, there was no relationship there by 1963. Bobby Kennedy lived to loathe Lyndon Johnson, as did Ted Kennedy and the Kennedy family. There was always a feeling that that Johnson's presidency wasn't real, that there was really just a co-option of Kennedy policies, and the proof is in the pudding that Bobby Kennedy geared up to run in 1968 over Vietnam and wanted to, in many ways help cripple Johnson's presidency.
Yeah, I mean, Kennedy had these weird facts. He said, he laughed at him as kind of a riverboat gambler. He called him landslide because he only won that election if he ever won it for the 48 election of the Senate by 87 votes. He used to kid him about having a dishonest election. But he also says something, Doug, you know about, which was he felt uncomfortable being in his presence. He didn't like being in the same room as Lyndon Johnson. Let's go to something really important to history about Kennedy, and that's the Vietnam War. Here's a new tape that came out November 20th that was just released, November 20th, 1963, just 2 days before the assassination. Kennedy had his eye on the situation of Vietnam that fall. Here he is, just as I said, just 2 days before he got killed, talking about what he was going to follow up with South Vietnam, U.S. Ambassador to South Vietnam, Henry Cabot Lodge. Let's listen.
They were going to have a briefing book Monday by Saturday, but I think I won't be back here till maybe 7. I have to see Cabot Lodge on Sunday, and I begin talking to him on Monday, so we got to have something to take to Texas with me.
What's your sense of where we would have gone? We went with 500,000 troops, of course, as our complement of troops over there, subsequent beginning in 65. Do you think Kennedy would have, I've got my own views, what are yours? Do you think Kennedy would have escalated the way Johnson did and made this into an American war in Vietnam?
I absolutely do not. The evidence is, I think, growing all the time that John F. Kennedy would not have been suckered into Vietnam the way Lyndon Johnson was. I say that because Mike Forrestal, I had written the biography of James Forrestal, his father, and I used to interview Mike Forrestal. But John F. Kennedy had gone to Mike Forrestal and actually wanted a plan how to get out of there. There was a feeling that it was a lost cause. And Kennedy gave a world peace speech. He was starting a new kind of foreign policy. And remember, the generals didn't do John F. Kennedy, as you know, Chris, from your writing your own book. They didn't do him well by Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy just laughed off the generals in the end. So the thought that he would be so overwhelmed by what the military was telling him about Vietnam, the way Johnson was, doesn't seem very likely. We'll never know because there was an election in '64 that affected Vietnam. We don't know if Kennedy would have responded to a Gulf of Tonkin incident, on and on and on. But you cannot say that John F. Kennedy wasn't looking for a way to get out of that mess.
I absolutely agree with you. I think we don't ever know the future when someone's been killed, but I absolutely believe, based upon his experience in going over to see the French war in Indochina in 51, opposing the entry of U.S. troops, certainly the use of U.S. firepower in 54 with the Dien Bien Phu, he always knew the issue was nationalism, and all the more troops we could put in there would simply increase their nationalism. They would resent us even more the more troops we put in, and that turned out to be the case.
Completely agree. And also keep in mind, and it connects to our previous, the comments we had, there was such a thing as, as new frontiersmen. There was something different about Jack and Bobby Kennedy's relationship to the military than, say, Lyndon Johnson. And, a lot of people were loyal to the Kennedys, Stuart Udall as Interior, for example, even though they stayed on with Lyndon Johnson. And Kennedy was getting his footing. He had won the big showdowns in Berlin by not being a militarist, and he'd won it in Cuba by not being a militarist. The notion that he would squander his entire presidency on the gamble of Vietnam wasn't in the cards, and he was backing away from overcommitting the United States in the fall of '63. I've been writing on Walter Cronkite, and Cronkite did a famous interview at Hyannisport with John F. Kennedy, and Kennedy dropped, it's in your book, and Kennedy drops the bomb on, Cronkite's first half an hour nightly news of distancing America from Vietnam to a degree. So you started seeing in the fall Kennedy hadn't bought into the idea that the dominoes were going to fall if we lost South Vietnam, even though the domino theory was in effect.
Every time I hear a candidate for president say, I'm going to listen to the generals on the ground and take their instructions, I go, wait a minute, you're running to be their boss. You're running to be a U.S. commander-in-chief. Your job is to tell them what the mission is. Hey, thank you so much. By the way, Kennedy was already thinking about color TV at the '64 convention. I guess he figured he was going to win the nomination and he was going to get reelected. He's already planning ahead right at the end there. It's sad, but it's also positive in the way he was so optimistic. Doug Brinkley, one of my favorite historians, one of the best in the country. Thank you so much for coming on from Rice University, as always.